Some prisons are built for punishment, others for silence. But Kwang Prison in Nonthaburi, Thailand's most notorious jail, is said to hold more than just the living. On its execution ground, hundreds of men drew their last breath. And today, guards whisper that their spirits never left. Kwang Prison sits on the west bank of the Chao Phraya River, not far from Bangkok's glittering skyline. Yet, the atmosphere inside its high concrete walls could not be further from the bustling city outside. Built in the 1930s, it was designed as Thailand's maximum security prison, a place for the nation's most dangerous criminals, murderers, drug traffickers, and those condemned to die. Overcrowding has always haunted the prison. Thousands of men are crammed into cells meant for a fraction of that number. Days blur into nights, and time stretches painfully for those awaiting execution. Among inmates, Kwang earned a name whispered with dread, the Big Tiger. Once swallowed by the Big Tiger, few leave alive. Foreign prisoners who ended up here called it the Bangkok Hilton, a bitter hayok. There is no comfort within these walls, only steel bars, concrete floors, and a suffocating sense of finality. Guards carry heavy keys that jangle as they move, each sound echoing like a reminder of captivity. The air is heavy with sweat, incense from small shrines, and the unspoken knowledge that this place has witnessed countless final moments. But what makes Kwang infamous above all is its execution ground. For decades, this was where sentences were carried out. Men were led blindfolded into a chamber and tied to a post. Beyond those doors, mercy ended, and silence was permanent. Locals in Nonthaburi whisper that the soil itself is cursed. Too much blood has soaked into the earth. Too many last cries have been carried by the wind. Monks brought in for blessings describe the ground as thick with suffering, a place where prayers struggle to take hold. Even today, as Bangkok grows around it, Kwang remains a shadow, a prison not only of the living, but of the dead. The execution chamber at Kwang was stark, functional, and terrifying in its simplicity. For decades, prisoners were executed by firing squad. Blindfolded, shackled, and tied to a wooden cross, they faced the barrels of rifles. A screen was placed in front of them, and behind it, soldiers fired in unison. Death was not always instant. Some required additional shots, each echo ringing across the prison walls. Later, in the early 2000s, the method changed to lethal injection. But while the tools changed, the ground itself remained the same. It was the place of endings, and its history weighed heavily on anyone who entered. Guards who stood witness spoke of the cries that never left them. Some men shouted for their mothers, others begged for forgiveness. A few cursed the world with their last breath. Their voices, it is said, still echo in the chamber. At night, when the chamber was empty, guards on duty reported sounds that should not exist. The metallic clatter of chains, footsteps pacing across concrete, the faint murmuring of prayers in languages long forgotten. More than one guard admitted that they refused to linger near the execution ground after midnight. One story tells of a guard who locked up the chamber after the day's duties, only to hear the heavy wooden door creak open behind him. When he turned, no one was there, yet the door swung wide. Another swore he heard the rattling of shackles, growing louder and louder, until he fled his post in terror. Even during the day, some claimed the chamber felt cold, despite Thailand's tropical heat. Visitors described an atmosphere so heavy it pressed against their chest, as if unseen eyes were watching. For those who believe, it is not hard to imagine why. The execution ground has seen hundreds of deaths, each violent, each unwilling. Where so much suffering has gathered, how could silence truly remain? Guards are trained to be men of discipline, to enforce order without hesitation. Yet within Bang Kwang's walls, even they speak of things that discipline cannot explain. One retired guard described nights when the corridors seemed alive. He would hear footsteps marching in rhythm, as though a group of men were being led down the hallway. But when he checked, every cell was locked, every prisoner accounted for. Still, the footsteps continued, fading only when they reached the execution chamber. Another guard spoke of hearing voices in the darkness, not cries of the living, but low murmurs that rose and fell like chanting. He swore they came from the chamber itself, though no monks were present, no rituals performed. Some described shadows that did not belong. On more than one occasion, guards claimed to see rows of men standing in silence within the chamber, dark outlines in prisoner uniforms, faces hidden. They stood still, as though awaiting orders, then vanished when lantern light touched them. Perhaps the most chilling accounts came from those stationed outside the execution ground at night. Guards patrolling the yard swore they saw figures pacing the walls, thin men with shaved heads, shackles glinting on their ankles. Yet when they approached, the shadows dissolved into nothing. Even the toughest officers admitted the fear. One said plainly, "You can guard the living, but how do you guard against the dead?" Though many refused to speak publicly, within the barracks the stories spread. Keys jangling without hands to hold them, chains dragging across concrete, a figure glimpsed in the corner of one's vision, always waiting, always watching. In Bang Kwang, even the men sworn to enforce silence cannot escape the voices of the past. If the guards feared the execution ground, the prisoners feared it even more. For those serving life or awaiting death, the chamber was a constant shadow. They knew that any day, their names could be called, and their walk through the yard would be their last. Inmates spoke of figures moving in the darkness long after lights out, men in shackles stumbling silently through the corridors. When challenged, they vanished into air. Some prisoners woke screaming, swearing they had been dragged by invisible hands toward the chamber. Others described sobbing at night, faint at first, then louder, as if dozens of voices wept together. When guards checked, the cells were silent. No one admitted to crying. One prisoner claimed he was visited by a man in a prison uniform who sat on his bed. The stranger whispered, "It's over," then disappeared. Later, the prisoner learned that another man had been executed that very night. Fear spread quickly among the cells nearest the chamber. Prisoners refused to sleep against the walls, saying they felt cold hands tugging their blankets. Some scratched protective charms onto the concrete floors, begging for mercy from unseen forces. Rumors spread that those who mocked the dead faced punishment. One inmate, laughing about the ghosts, was later found with bruises across his arms, as though gripped tightly by hands too strong to fight. For the condemned, the fear was suffocating. Some prayed constantly, chanting to keep the shadows away. Others refused food, convinced they were already marked. In Bang Kwang, the living shared space with the dead, and no one could tell where one ended and the other began. The prisoners called it simple truth. The execution ground was never empty. Even when no bodies lay there, the spirits of those taken lingered, pacing, waiting, watching. Long before the prison was built, locals said the land carried a heavy energy. Some believed it had once been a site of punishment in older times, a place where criminals were executed in public. Whether true or not, by the time Bang Kwang rose from the soil, the ground was already whispered to be cursed. The prison's history only deepened those fears. Hundreds of executions left the earth soaked in unseen scars. Buddhist monks invited to perform blessings described the atmosphere as suffocating. They spoke of prayers that seemed to fall flat, as if the ground resisted purification. One monk recounted entering the chamber for a cleansing ritual. As he chanted, he felt a pressure around his chest, as though many eyes watched him. He described hearing whispers behind him, though no one stood there. When he finished, he warned the guards, "The spirits are not at rest." They remain bound here. Locals in Nonthaburi avoid walking near the prison walls at night. Some say they hear cries drifting on the wind. Others describe seeing figures pacing along the edge of the river, shackled ankles dragging across stone. Taxi drivers prefer longer routes rather than passing close to the execution grounds after dark. Even after the switch to lethal injection, the stories did not stop. Guards still report the same footsteps, the same shadows, the same cold breath in the chamber. The method may have changed, but the ground has not forgotten what it has taken. For many Thais, Bang Kwang is more than a prison. It is a place where karma unfolds brutally, where the weight of countless lives cut short has left a stain that no bars or walls can contain. Today, Bang Kwang Prison still stands. It houses men from across Thailand and beyond, each sentenced for crimes that brought them here. But behind the official records and reports lies another truth, one carried in whispers, in glances, in fear that never fades. Tourists passing through Bangkok rarely hear of the ghosts of Bang Kwang. The prison does not advertise its shadows. Yet, among guards, prisoners, and locals, the stories are endless. They speak of figures marching at night, voices calling from empty cells, and a chamber that refuses to be silent. Is it guilt that creates these visions? Is it fear, shaping shadows into men long dead? Or is it something deeper? The reality that places of violence cannot rid themselves of what they have taken? The truth may never be known, but one thing is certain. Bang Kwang is not just a prison of concrete and steel. It is a prison of memory, a prison of shadows, and every man who walks its halls carries the weight of those who never left. So the question remains, if you stood on the execution ground at midnight, would you hear silence? Or would you hear the last breath of the condemned still echoing against the walls, refusing to fade? In Nonthaburi, they say the big tiger devours all. The guilty, the innocent, and even the spirit. Once taken inside, you may never leave, not alive, not even in death.